Right, citizens were on the verge of starvation. Grocers brought their flour inside for safety. Farmers left markets and half their goods unsold. At noon, crowds led by Ben Bennett and former Constable Frank Trias took a few old muskets from an abandoned storehouse. Next, they rushed for weapons stored in the third story of the Danville National Bank. On Mill and Northumberland Streets, police met them. One police tried to arrest Trias for using incendiary language, but he could not get to Trias in the crowd. A sign on Bloom Street proposed a meeting of working men in Seckler's Woods on July 26th. Following these events, the authorities gave food to those in need. Actually, what they also gave was 80 cents a day to help the workers. You have the sheriff issuing, in consequence of the riotous proceedings of Tuesday last, followed up by the incendiary placards posting around Thursday morning, calling for a meeting to be held at Seckler's Woods, the persons to come armed and the sheriff of the county and the solicitation of many citizens issued the following. I, James Miller, sheriff of Montour County, hereby call upon all peaceable and law-abiding citizens to hold themselves in readiness to assist in putting down all riotous and disorderly demonstrations that may threaten the peace and good order of this community. July 26, 1877. Catholic. Again, we think there's violence now. God save the Commonwealth, he concludes. In 1894, smallpox shuts down the schools for a month. 1896, you got a big explosion at the big mill, and that's when the baby across the street, sort of like over where the gas station is now, was killed in her mother's arms. In addition which, 6 were killed, others 20 injured by shrapnel and scalding. In 1893, another depression, the Panic of 1893, and Coxey Army marches on Washington demanding relief. Coxey lived in Danville. Fascinating little, he left here when he got divorced in 1881. Massive bankruptcies were occurring, and the robber barons were actually taking advantage of this to buy up all the small operations as best they could. Which leads us, and I strongly recommend, The Bully Pulpit, Doris Kearns Goodwin. This is kind of why I got inspired to say, hey, Van, I'm working on a few things that are interesting. Maybe I can work this into it. Basically, the big picture was we were moving from an agrarian society into an industrial society, and we didn't know how. It was accelerated by a certain civil war that required a lot of iron, and so that led to a lot of good profit and a lot of good work. But after the war, what happens? And the price drops, and you have competition with other industries that are happening and other iron works that are happening all over Pennsylvania and other countries or other states. You also then have some other foreign nations shipping in their iron goods. There's no regulation, no safety controls. It wasn't until Teddy Roosevelt and the Sherman Act, the trust busting, basically around 1900 and thereafter, that things started developing to put controls over the corporations. But you have basically 50 years of laissez-faire economy, supposedly guided by the real Adam Smith, the Scottish economist, who was a good Calvinist Presbyterian, and motivated by self-interest is okay. That's kind of how we operate. But it has to be bridled by a Christian ethic. Carnegie on occasion would pay tribute to that, but not many of the others would. And we need anything? Anybody need anything? Raise your hand. I would love another.
Okay.
Anybody else? No? Okay. So we're trying to adjust, and one of my lines to Van was, yes, I like the fact that we have a Beaver library. Thank you, Thomas Beaver. I like the fact that we have a Geisinger. That's nice. Thank you. Otherwise, we'd be a lot like Mount Carmel. But basically, why do we give so much credit for philanthropists for being philanthropists when that's what they should be doing? In the mid-1890s, the genteel world of patrician reformers and civil service enthusiasts that Taft and Roosevelt initially typified had begun a seismic shift. Widespread discontent with the industrial order, building for over a decade, threatened now to flare into open revolution. The growth of colossal corporations in the aftermath of the Civil War had produced immense consolidated wealth for business owners, but the lives of the working people, Western farmers and Eastern factory workers alike, had become increasingly difficult. Thank you. We plow new fields, we open new mines, we found new cities, Roosevelt mayor rival Henry George observed. We girdle the land with iron roads and lace the air with telegraph wires. We add knowledge to knowledge and utilize invention after invention. Yet despite such vaunted progress, he declared, it becomes no easier for the masses of our people to make a living. On the contrary, it is becoming harder. The captains of industry, George acknowledged, had fueled unprecedented innovations. The steamship taking the place of the sailing vessel, the railroad train of the wagon, the reaping machine of the scythe. The closest we can get to is what happened with the computer in our day. I remember a sweet young thing was attending Bible study, and I was just talking about a new typewriter I had that actually could memorize about 5 lines and would reprint it. It was amazing. And she said, well, what kind of computer did you learn on at college? To confirm the positive changes wrought by the Industrial Revolution, he continued, one need only visit the great workshops where boots and shoes are turned out by the case with less labor than the old-fashioned cobbler could have put on the sole. The factories where under the eye of a girl cotton becomes cloth faster than hundreds of stalwart weavers could have turned it out with their hand looms. With this transfiguring mechanization and the development of mass productions, however, the gulf between the employed and the employer is growing wider. Social contrasts are becoming sharper. As liveried carriages appear, so do barefoot children. Which is why, a little research, in 1860 to 1900, the wealthiest 2% owned more than 33% of the nation's wealth. The top 10% owned 75% of the nation's wealth. 1860 to 1900. 2007. The richest 1% of the American population owned 34.6% of the nation's total wealth, and the next 19 owned 50%. Thus, the top 20% of Americans owned 85% of the country's wealth. Maybe we do understand the 1870s. Bear with me again. John Mitchell, the charismatic president of the United Mine Workers, believed that if the American people could truly see the sorrows and the heartaches of those who spend their lives in the coal mines, they would sympathize with the strikers' decision to stop work. To the average magazine or newspaper reader, the lives of those who delve in the bowels of the earth, removed from the sight of their fellow beings, remain as darkly hidden as the work itself, while the hardships generated by their strike were too immediately apparent. Some years earlier, Sam McClure, what was interesting and from the book, not just talking about Roosevelt and Taft and the progressive movement, and eventually how Roosevelt sort of betrayed Taft and back and forth, but the important role of the muckraking journalists, such as McClure's magazine, Atlantic Monthly, and they're beginning around 1890 or so, beginning in league with Roosevelt, developing and presenting real narratives, a good investigative journalism, the events and activities that were taking place in the coal mines, in the strikes. In fact, one of the interesting works that got him into a little bit of trouble because it seemed anti-progressive, one of the guys, I forget his name, but working for McClure's magazine, focused in on the scabs of the big strike in the mines that was taking place basically from Hazleton up into Wilkes-Barre. And he was talking about how ill-used and abused and indeed attacked and killed they were by the strikers. And so nobody's clean because it's an unclean situation. Some years earlier, Sam McClure had tried to expose the suffering of the industry's workers, commissioning the realist author Stephen Crane, Red Badge of Courage, to write a piece entitled In the Depths of a Coal Mine. I have it, you can get it, thanks to the invention of the computer. You can get it online, it's no longer, you don't have to pay for it. Crane's dead. I do like copyright, however. Crane described a sinister system that brought children yet at the spanking period into the mines as breaker boys. There they worked 10 hours each day, separating out pieces of slate and other impurities from streams of coal, spreading on by conveyor belts. Earning 55 cents a day, a breaker boy rarely set foot in the schoolhouse. His highest ambition was to rise to door, to be a door boy, then mule boy, laborer, miner's helper, and finally full-fledged miner. If he reached the zenith, having survived the gas, the floods, the squeezes of falling rocks, the cars shooting out through the tunnels, the precarious elevators, and the peculiar miner's lung disease, he started on the descent going back to become a miner's helper, then a miner laborer, then a door boy, and when old and decrepit he finally returns to the breaker where he started as a child. After that, the concept that these guys are working, basically originally, especially in the mills, you're working 12-hour days, and they're going 24 hours full steam with a nod to the Sunday Sabbath, but you still have to soak the furnaces. These kids are not getting an education. And so is the American dream possible for those so trapped? And that was what they were beginning to really focus in on. And so eventually under Wilson, we finally had child labor laws to protect the children. How many generations? So the role of government was being discussed and addressed. How do you deal with an industrial society? Do you regulate corporations? And it began with trust busting the sugar trust. You had boodlers, the political graft that was going on, because basically you got the money, you get to elect your politicians, especially if you control the Senate, because the states elected the senators. We didn't have a public election of senators. That was a sort of a modern invention. What also happened, and actually the muckraking became a derisive comment because of the popularity and success of so much good journalism through McClure's, Hearst and everybody else started joining the bandwagon in order to make a profit, and started doing also sort of sensational journalism, which was just incendiary and bad journalism and only caused further problems. Not, fortunately, our journalism today is beyond reproach. Teddy Roosevelt began his career by voting against establishing, when he was in the Congress of the New York State Assembly, he voted against increasing the minimum wage to 25 cents. You also have this strange attitude, which we attribute to the robber barons, the idea that we are a nation of rugged individualism. We're a nation of bootstraps. We're a nation of achievement. And anybody can rise. Well, if you have certain advantages. And again, there's a statement that sense of class fate, and a sense that is your destiny in life, is to be a puddler or to be a breaker boy. Mine is to rise up and enjoy my wealth. I've had distinct advantages. and there's that sense that it's not my responsibility to care for you as my work. I guess I sort of also have a personal investment in this, and kind of why I kind of shared some stuff with Van, is that I grew up in a factory. We had a very small time factory, and we made paint, ink, and varnish. I grew up at 6 years old shoveling rosin into vats for varnish, occasionally getting woozy and falling off the catwalk. But seeing my grandfather and my father, who would often recruit workers from Rollaway State Prison because they were the most reliable and could hang with them and do the work, the responsibility of a boss for the employees, and also the responsibility of being one of the boss's sons who had to work harder than the employees, but also seeing how difficult it is to manage a factory, because basically when they went from oil to latex and took lead out, we couldn't compete anymore. And my dad had to shift it to pure retail. And so how do you manage all these adaptations and changes in life? This is what we're trying to do on a big time. That's what Danville has been struggling with all its life. The squalid conditions of the immigrant slums, question of labor rights. Hello there. One railroad worker out of 300 was killed on the job. 1 out of 50 were injured, and the railroads were never liable. There was no liability. In fact, another indulgence. Got to check my time here because we got to get to some facts about pay and scales in Danville. It was my grandmother that started our family on our